Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by The Dollar Menu. Nothing says bargain like chemicals pretending to be food. Now let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Amazing Amy. In her next adventure, Amazing Amy is a private detective. Read all about it, and Amazing Amy goes under covers. Welcome everyone to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we are filmmakers. We make things, and then we like to use that kind of process of what we know from behind the scenes as actors and producers and filmmakers, and then watch movies to see what we recognize and what's unfamiliar. How'd they do that? And then we try to figure it out from just watching the movie. Like generally, we don't normally go and watch a bunch of behind the scenes or read other people's reviews or whatever. We try to come in hot with our own takes. And sometimes it blows up in our face, but sometimes it's just a really good conversation. What can you figure out from just watching the movie? And also, how much can you learn? Like I was telling you before we rolled about I've been saving up like a year's worth of shortoftheweek.com digest emails. Like every week, if you're not familiar with Short of the Week, it's kind of the place to get in. Like if, you know, South by and Sundance are the film festivals you want to get into to meet industry people, like the online version of that is basically at this point, shortoftheweek.com. It's where everyone who wants to see short films or wants to see who's doing interesting work is going to go and look and see, oh, this is who's getting featured. And so it's a good feather in the hat if you get on there. And, you know, I know people who have gotten on there before, and it's really cool. I'm excited for them. But it's also just interesting as a very immediate way to see who's getting, you know, notoriety of some kind, right? Who's getting noticed, just to go through and watch a bunch of those films and see and kind of study like, okay, what did they see? What did the programmer see in this short film? What can I as a filmmaker learn from that? And so I'll go through and I won't watch every single thing they select, but I'll just kind of base on either the thumbnail that's in the email or the description of the project. And I'm like, does either of these things grab me? Like, does this look from the outset like a film that I would kind of make or want to watch, or, you know, on any level? And then in that case, I select it. So I don't watch a lot of their animations, for instance, but I'll watch a lot of their dramas, not as many of their documentaries, etc. And so I was interested to see what can I learn about, because I just wrapped, you know, our short film I've been working on for, you know, over a year now. And I finally got the final color on that. We'll talk about that in a future episode, maybe next week, just to discuss. That was my first time doing a color turnover. But I'm just watching all these short films like, what am I not doing in my films that maybe they are? What can and it's been really interesting because at this point, you know, I've watched, I don't know, 20 or 30 of these things. And I wouldn't say, Todd, that I've learned anything. I'm bankrupt so far. Like there's some really, you know, good films, and there's certainly a lot of films that, you know, look pretty good. There's also a lot of films that don't really look very good. And I'm like, okay, I guess the content really grabbed the programmer, even though the content to me seems kind of bland and dull and didn't really have anything to say or said something that's been said 1,000 times before in better ways. And so it's really, I don't know, in some ways, I guess, heartwarming that I'm like, it's a crapshoot. It's just, you know, people throw the dice and sometimes they hit sevens, I guess. And maybe I just keep crapping out. I don't know. I try not to, as it goes, you try not to take too personally when people don't see your work as an artist. You know, at the end of the day, you're making what I made this last project based on what 90% of what I wanted. And that other 10%, I was like, okay, maybe festivals will gravitate towards this because there's some interesting conversation happening. But at the end of the day, I still made it the way I wanted to make it. And also made it so that it lived in my portfolio in a new way that other things didn't fit in. So I'm thinking about it in all these ways. What's the story that I find personally interesting? How can I tell it in a way that I think festivals might appreciate? And also make it in a way that plugs some holes in my portfolio as a director. Like, okay, I can do all these things at once, and that's fine. But you were talking about just that aspect of watching other work and being careful on what you walk away while doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about is trying to learn more of your craft. Mm-hmm. You are currently in search of something more, right, than what you know. Mm-hmm. Another experience, right? Like a different way of looking at the same thing that you've seen, 1,000 times, right? I think we're all looking for that. A good lyric can do that. It says something that you've heard 100 times before, but it says it in a different way, and all of a sudden, it opens your mind. You're not expecting to for it to like change the way you make films or watch films, but just a little spark, a little bit of inspiration, I think, is what you're talking about. Yep. The difference there is like letting it influence what you make instead of how you make it, right? Mm. And so if you're making something that is trying to make a statement, whatever that statement might be, I think it's beautiful to look for new ways to make that statement, but not making a different statement because you saw something else, and you would never do that. Yeah. But I think that a lot of people would, and a lot of people are looking for that. I mean, I've done that in the past, where I've like, oh man, I really love this type of music and I love this artist. I want to sound like that. And then I'd go try to sound like that. And then I just don't, and it's a failed experiment because it wasn't me. Right. And I think there are so many moving parts in making a film, whether that's a short or a feature or anywhere in between. And there's so many people that have their hands in stuff. That it's a much harder thing to try to be somebody else when you've got 40 people who are all working towards a specific goal. All their inputs are in it, and they're all their own individual people. I can't wait to talk about your film because I'm very proud of you that like you had this idea. You put your money where your mouth was. You went in. You got the top people to do the top work. And you didn't skimp on anything from beginning to end. And I think that, obviously I understand that. And I like respect the hell out of that. When you're, I go out and I watch short films all the time. I've been watching a lot of short films lately too, mostly like sci-fi stuff. Cause I just want to see something new, a new story, and usually you get that from sci-fi because there's always some kind of weird twist that you don't expect because it could be literally anything in the universe, right? As opposed to a drama where it's two people talking in a room. Well, yeah, you could learn something from the conversation or somebody could maybe do something, but you're kind of confined to that interaction. I guess that's it. It's I think we're all just looking for inspiration to pull out a little bit more of ourselves into what we do. That's probably what you're looking for, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I really loved what you said. Like, you have to be careful why you're doing it. It's like, it's one thing to get inspiration. It's another thing to just kind of kowtow and say what you think people want to hear. That's a completely different thing. You're right. I had an idea. I had a thought or a comment that I wanted to make through my film, and there's nothing you're going to do to make me change that. Like, if anyone tries to, then it's like either I just don't make the film, or you're not the right collaborator, or whatever, and that's okay too. But if you don't have anything to say and you're just kind of going and repeating what other people have to say, like I'm sure a lot of people have success that way. I mean, there's how many horror films that are just repeating beats of other horror films without anything new to add. That's a dime a dozen, and you can make a living that way. I think at the end of the day, you'll probably look back and despair because you're like, why did I do that? I learned two things. One, don't do that. Two, you got an education that you could have learned, earned with $1.50 in late fees from your local library. But at least I won't be unoriginal. So
I mean, yeah, like just to chime in really quick, I always go back to the scene in Adaptation where he's at the conference and the guy's talking to him and he stands up and he says, "What if I want to make a film with no story?" And the guy berates him, saying, "How dare you waste my 2 hours?"
Yeah.
And I feel like that a lot, like there needs to be a reason why somebody's making this. And so when I go into something, when I go into a film or listen to music or look at a painting, I am looking for that reason why you're taking my time, why you're taking my attention, why I'm granting you this of my life. And if that doesn't exist, I fucking hate it. It really is important, And yes, sometimes things are just, are fun and they're more bubblegum or the kids movies and stuff. But even Pixar has proven, even films geared towards children can be very meaningful and have a big statement and can be very impactful.
Yeah.
So when anyway, we'll talk about your film when we talk about your film, but I feel like that's there and it's evident. And when I don't get that from a piece of art, it really like hurts my feelings, you know, like I trusted you and you let me down kind of thing. So.
Yeah. It can feel brutal. So what are we covering today, man?
Today we are covering The Brutalist, which is out in theaters now. If you haven't seen it, please pause this episode and go watch it. We're going to spoil a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, we're going to dive into a handful of things. We'll certainly talk about a little bit of the cinematography, discuss some of the oners, as well as breaking up the frame with style and tone, and dive into a lot of the story and writing. Talk about immigration and symbolism and see what it's trying to talk about, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. When a visionary architect and his wife flee post-war Europe in 1947 to rebuild their legacy and witness the birth of the modern United States, their lives are changed forever by a mysterious wealthy client. It's directed by Brady Corbet, whatever. Written by Brady Corbet and Mona Fastvold. Cinematography by Lowell Crawley. Featuring Adrien Brody as László Tóth. Felicity Jones as Erzsébet Tóth, Guy Pearce as Harrison Lee Van Buren Sr., Joe Alwyn as Harry Lee, Raffey Cassidy as Zsófia, Alessandro Nivola as Attila, and Emma Laird as Audrey.
Erzsébet, pardon me, am I pronouncing that correctly?
That's fine. Just fine. Feel free to call me Elizabeth if you prefer it.
And your English is impressive.
Thank you. I attended university in England.
Oh, where?
Oxford, to study English. And I returned home for communications.
And did you do anything with that?
Yes, I wrote for a popular national paper at home. Magyar Nemzet.
A journalist.
Cultural?
Foreign affairs.
Well, perhaps you can help your husband sound less like he shines shoes for a wage.
Haven't you told them anything about me?
László, how long have you been here now? 4, 5 years? You have no excuse anymore. I'm sorry, I got a little carried away there. Will you please pass that back?
Interesting. Okay, so walking into this thing, I told you like 3.5 hours, and it's funny because I think you thought that I was exaggerating a little, but there's an actual intermission, thankfully, which is well timed and very effective, I think. But we both made the same question of like, I wonder if it'll be worth, the runtime. And so, I guess a couple of questions, but top of mind, first off, worth the runtime?
I don't know. It's hard to. It's really, that's a hard question to start with. Can we not start with that? Can we start with
Fair? Yeah.
Let's start with going to the theater is magical. Let me just say, because there's so many things around it. It's one thing to jump on your laptop at the end of the day and say, you know what, I'm just going to watch something, and or I've been wanting to watch even if you're saying I've been wanting to watch this film and now I have 2 hours and I'm going to sit down and watch it. It's a whole nother thing to get in your car, to buy a ticket, to drive to the theater, to get in. In my case, this took an entire half of my day to do this. I had to drive 30 miles because it wasn't showing at my theater near me. I had to go into the city, cross the bridge. I had to fight traffic in the city. I had to find parking. I had to walk in. I was pissed. I was absolutely pissed the entire time.
Which is exactly what a filmmaker wants out of his audience.
Right. How about you only show it on like 1,000 screens across the country, not even 500 screens. I don't even know.
And before everyone walks in, slap the shit out of them.
Yes, exactly. Luckily, a good friend of mine hooked me up with an AMC gift card for my birthday. Thank you for that. Yeah. Which is exactly the dollar amount that I needed for the movie and the popcorn and the Coke and some food.
Holy
shit. It was literally exactly to the dime.
What the?
Oh yeah, God, it was perfect.
That's awesome.
Actually, I was 16 cents short, but the lady was like, you know what? Don't worry about it.
No way.
Yeah. So
okay,
anyway, point being, perfect. Thank you very much for that. And I was just pissed that somebody made a 3.5 hour movie, like that's not sci-fi. You know what I mean? Sorry, if you're not Nolan, I'm pissed. You're gonna make me mad. So, but I told myself, do not let this affect how you watch this movie, right? Because it's not it's not doing it justice. You're doing all of this effort. You're going through all this effort to go see this movie. Relax when you sit down, and and take it in for what it is. So, all that to be said, I sit down and I watch it, and the first, I guess, 60% of it before the intermission, was fantastic. It was just beautiful. It was motivated. I thought that the Adrien Brody should win Best Actor. Like he's just otherworldly. Like he is perfect for roles like this. There is no one else. He makes this movie for me. Like there is no one else that could do what he does. Just his facial features, his body, it's almost like he tells you more with his face than his character wants to tell you. I don't even know how to explain it. He just otherworldly in this role. And Felicity Jones also just masterful. Yeah. I just absolutely loved her performance, especially when she walked into their dinner at the end. She's
lit
like,
the place
"Don't
on
help me."
Fire.
Yes, and just destroyed him. Anyway. That whole scene was just probably my favorite scene of the entire movie. Not only her walking, I love that they show her outside on her, with her walker, and then she's inside with her walker. She won't let them help her. And then she gets drug out by Alwyn's character, by Harry. And this is I think it's all one shot, because there are oners all over the place in this movie. All over the place. And I think that was the coolest part about this movie to me, were the oners, where you don't even realize that it is one. I think there were probably like 4 or 5 that had already happened before I realized, oh, this is just a series of oners, this whole movie, right? Oh, this is going to be a 2-minute oner. Oh, this is going to be a 3-minute oner. And they were just fantastically executed. Guy Pearce, okay. I thought he was good at what he at the role, I guess, but I don't know. It could have replaced him with anybody. Same with Joe Alwyn. I just find them kind of annoying. But I thought he did a really good job of convincing me that he was doing a good thing for László at the same time as undermining that by doing shit like in the clip you showed. You know, he'll give László a bit, you know, this big project, but at the same time he'll talk down to him, or he'll throw him a dime and say, hey, you know, a quarter, and say, oh yeah, could you hand that back? Like making him pick that up off the ground, or whatever. And it was always very uncomfortable being like listening to him talk. There were a few times I laughed. You know, I actually like laughed out loud in the movie, which was good. But as a whole, like I'm okay to never watch it again. I'm just kind of, you know, it just felt a little lackluster because of the second act, or after the intermission. We come back and they're older, as they should be. It's a whole nother phase in their life and everything. But I feel like there's more emphasis on him as an individual and less emphasis on on him coming back to the project and the project itself, which is fine. It's, I guess, but it's not something that resonated with me, because in the end, what was the line that they end with? They end with his niece saying, it's don't let them lie to you. It's the destination, not the journey. Mm-hmm. And okay. Totally cool. It's another way to look at it. And obviously he was obsessed with finishing this project. Like he wanted to finish this project, you know? But I just don't know that I don't know. It didn't land with me. We don't talk at all at the end. We just hear her, who we haven't really seen before. She's like a new character, right? Have we seen her before?
That's his niece. Yeah. I mean, we've just seen her when she was a kid.
And she was like when though?
What do you mean? She's the quiet girl.
No, not who spoke at the very end.
Oh, then who are you talking about?
I guess his niece's daughter. That's his niece's daughter, so his grandniece.
Oh, sure.
Who's speaking at the gala at the very end. Yeah,
his niece is the one talking at the gala.
No, it's not. She's standing next to him, holding his shoulder.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway.
Okay, I really thought his niece is the one giving the speech, and then we see her daughter sitting quietly next to her.
No, that's his niece. His niece is standing next to him, holding his shoulder, and I think it's her daughter, because she was pregnant before she moved back,
right?
And now this woman has grown up, right? Because they're older. Mm-hmm. She's the one who's talking, okay. And I just I wasn't resonating with her because I'd never seen her before, and I'm thinking, why is she the one giving the speech? Why isn't his niece giving the speech? That would have meant a little bit more. And so, anyway, point being is that the first 60% of it before the intermission was great, and then it just kind of fell off at the end for me. And I know that I'm going to get hate about this because it's getting all of this Oscar buzz and everything, and it you know, probably or might win Best Picture, and if it does, it's very much worthy of it, I think. But you know, to hold it up against other films like The Pianist or like Parasite or, you know, Moonlight. I just can't do that. I just, you know, can't. Other than Adrien Brody's performance, I feel like it's something that I just, you know, feel like is good, definitely worth seeing, but I would be okay not watching it again.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, I'm okay not seeing it again as well. The runtime for me, hit or miss. That is probably a big reason. I think my first time through, I was definitely okay with the runtime.
Did you see this multiple times?
Yeah, I saw it twice. I was only going to see it once, but then you needed to take a break for, you know, you had stuff going on. No, it wasn't even that.
It wasn't playing.
It wasn't playing. Like, the release schedule of this movie is such a weird, it gets a little bit into some of my frustration and understanding of the Academy Awards, because they do these limited releases at the end of the year. And then, but it's like a week in New York and a week in LA. in order to qualify for the Oscars. But then they wait to release it until it's getting some buzz via award contention, and then they release it. And so like I do my little top 10 list at the end of the year, and that didn't get any consideration just because it hadn't actually come out. And so the Oscar winner for 2024, I won't have on my movie list until 2025. And people aren't going to be able to watch it until it's getting awards contention. And to me, that's just this whole fluky aspect of the Academy Awards. But at the same time, I appreciate it because it's so hard to get butts in seats that if you can manipulate the system a little bit in order to give your movie a better chance of making, you know, some profit in order to fund your next The Brutalist, then I get it. But it's frustrating as a movie fan to not get to see a movie whenever you're and getting to see it in contention with its peers. Like Heretic has to compete against The Brutalist, but Brutalist gets recency bias when it comes time to vote because it's more fresh, it's top of mind, and it's like, man, but Adrien Brody's so good. Hugh Grant killed this, and yet, you know, he's not going to get the same amount of weight in people's minds. Stuff like that, you know, kind of bothers me. But that's my tug of war. It's like, I understand it's hard to get people to watch a movie like The Brutalist unless it's getting contention, and therefore chicken and egg problem. But my first time through, I'm watching it and I'm gripped. It's epic, and it's hard to fund an epic period piece where hardly anything happens. Like, you know, vis-a-vis Oppenheimer gets Christopher Nolan. And therefore you can do a summer blockbuster about something that nothing happens and make you a lot of money doing it because of who's making it. And Brady Corbet, people don't know who that is. So use the system. And so I'm watching it and I'm really loving it, mostly for what you said. Like, Adrien Brody is just, when he gets the right roles, man, he goes into a different planet. And he's just such an alien. Suddenly, within seconds, you stop really seeing him, and you're like, yeah, he does have a funny accent, doesn't he? It's like, no, he doesn't. It's
just how he talks.
This is his character. Like, he's in it. And it's so cool. And I was just riveted with no idea. And what's funny, I watched it twice. And both times I'm thinking, this is a real person. Like, László Tóth was a real person. Just the way they frame it, and all his life experiences just felt so true. And it wasn't until this morning I took a bunch of notes yesterday. I watched it again and just wrote down way too much shit. And I was just like, you know what? I don't really have anything to talk about, so I'm just going to make as many notes as I can. And the accumulation of which will add up to a fun conversation I can have with Todd. And it wasn't until this morning I was like, I don't even know how they were pronouncing Tóth. And so I'm going, were they saying Todd? Were they saying Tóth? What's the proper pronunciation? And so I just kind of Googled his name just to see how to pronounce it, only to find out this is a fictional character. Like, he doesn't exist. Because I don't know anything about architecture. Like, I know some styles. Like, I'm familiar with brutalism because it's such an interesting visual thing, and it's used so heavily in, like, science fiction, again, to your point about, what we expect out of a 3-hour film. It's, otherworldly stuff, and brutalism fits perfectly into that. And so to find out Tóth isn't a real, like, person, I was like, thank God, now I can make so much more sense of this movie, because there were so many things that were, nagging at the back of my mind of like, I think this part may not have been true, but I don't want to suggest that this thing didn't happen to this person. Like the rape scene, I was like, that felt a little convenient. But I don't want to start saying like, I don't know that this guy got raped. It just felt like a shitty thing to throw out there into the universe. But then after finding out, I was like, okay, so it is convenient because they wrote it to be convenient. Right. And that just started unlocking. So I wish I'd known that going into my second viewing, so that I could watch it through the avenue that I think this movie is taking, which is a conversation about the diaspora of Judaism, or Judaism, It's so funny. Sometimes I hear people pronounce it Judaism, and I always see the Y in my head.
Oh yeah, Judy.
All these Judys out there.
All these Judys.
So, discussing like Jews and the diaspora moving away from, Jerusalem and what have you. And so this is a whole conversation about that suddenly opened up, even with the, notes that I scribbled down. It made sense. And I could start to tease things apart about, what I think they were implying or looking at and evaluating and, teasing out. And it's in that lens, if you're watching it, very interesting and fascinating. And it's a good conversation piece. I'm not going to suggest that I would agree or disagree with everything whole cloth, but it's fascinating, to think about Tóth as some representation of, Jewish people in America, and to see his wife as this representation of Israel, and to see Harrison Lee Van Buren Sr. as a representation of America. And even that scene we played is so that sequence, that scene overall, he's touting himself. And I personally loved Guy Pearce in that role. I thought he crushed it. It's the best performance I've seen out of Guy Pearce since The Count of Monte Cristo or something like that. It's just, I thought he was fantastic, because of how much I hated him. He just pushed me and pulled me. I was like, okay, good. Yeah. You know what? Yeah. His mother died. You know what? Okay. I can see why he was reacting the way he did. He was out of control, and it's just so much push and pull. And then you get into some of these moments, okay, he's this wealthy guy who doesn't have the lens of, being a humanist on any level. And it's fascinating, to start looking through those lenses of, well, maybe he's just the representation of America. And there's a conversation being had about how America treats immigrants, even ones who are well-educated, and who have a lot of class, but because they speak a little funny, suddenly you degrade them, not just in your own eyes, but in front of everyone around them. To do that in front of someone's wife and spouse and his niece, that's his family. Now you're, just ripping him apart and, degrading him in front of people that love him. Wow. And what's so great about that soundbite that we played is it sounds like he's going to apologize, I went too far. But what he actually is saying is, give me my money back. Mm-hmm. It's not, I went too far making fun of you.
Bend down, pick it up off the ground, and then hand it, go through all of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. My digression was throwing money away. My digression wasn't making fun of you in your accent. Yeah. That's such a great punch in the stomach, because it sounds like, okay, yeah, you know what, my bad. I took the joke too far. And it's nope, the joke was fine. What I shouldn't have done was throw money away. Mm-hmm. Wow, what a great comment. And it's wonderful. That opening scene was beautiful because you're hearing the letter from Erzsébet, and she's talking about his niece and the process of immigrating, and she's making this thesis statement at the end of that sequence that quoting Von Goethe of none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free.
Oh my God, yeah.
It's just a great punch in the stomach as you're also watching his immigration process. He gets to Ellis Island. And I think it's the most honest. There's several immigration sequences in films of this era that feel honest to me. Something like The Immigrant is sickening. But then something like Brooklyn, Saoirse Ronan, and you're watching her come from Ireland and, immigrate. And that's really interesting, and it pulls you in a different way. And then something like this is, oh my God, it's scary, right? It kind of feels like cattle being herded through gates. But then there's also this jolt of excitement when they see the Statue of Liberty. And you're just like, oh, but you know what? You're in America, opportunity, and you're alive, and there's something great that's happening here. And then juxtaposed against hearing, his wife write to him and discuss about what does freedom really mean. And we're going to be exploring all of that, especially in context of what it means to be an immigrant in America. And that's pretty cool. And when
they see the Statue of Liberty, it's upside down, and it's sideways. Stuff like that is purposefully done. Yeah. It's like, this is, you're going to get this side of the US, and it's interesting that you're bringing that up, because the biggest line I feel like that I resonated with the film in the entire film was when Erzsébet is like, she's like in the hospital after she OD'd, and she says to him that she wants to go back home because this country is rotting or something like that. She said something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why at that moment, well, maybe I know why, I don't know. But at that moment I instantly was like, oh my God, yes. And I just really resonated with that, because I feel like, as much as I love this country, there's a lot of backwards ass shit that happens, and that we live for different purpose and reason here than most places on the planet, right? We live to make money here more than most places. Of course, you've got to make money, but anyway, and that aligns a lot with what she was talking about, or what she's talking about. It's not just about money, but you've got to do work. She's writing about lipsticks and stuff that, here, whereas there she was writing about political upheaval and doing really meaningful work, but she's got to do it because she's got to make that dollar, right? And the almighty dollar. And she said, it's rotting here. And man, it was just like a real moment in the film for me,
That's so cool. And so, I'll run through a few notes and just kind of walk through some of my thoughts, I guess. And so there's that moment after he gets into, New York, where he's in the brothel and he's trying to cheat, right? And he actually just can't perform, and as he's walking out, the woman says, she's offering him, we have boys too, if that's what you prefer. And he's like, nah. And it's so interesting. That's all very purposeful, of course. Just about probably everything in this movie, if with a proper lens, suddenly screams, so much interesting dialogue and commentary about a number of things, specifically about America and Jewish people in America, but then extrapolate from that. But for that moment, it, one speaks to, I think he just can't get himself to cheat on his wife. In his heart, he loves her and his body won't allow him to. And I think if his wife is a representation of Israel, then it's making that comment about, you can come to America, but in your heart, you belong over here. And no matter what, you can never fit into this country. If in your heart, you still believe, you're Jewish or what have you. And it also indicates, of course, that in the future, he never really made a pass at Audrey, the woman who gets him kicked out, right? That was never in contention, but it's just that extra layer of, even if he wanted to, what would be the point? It's just not in him. And then, of course, that's what he does. He goes after the brothel, he makes his way down to Pennsylvania, the land of decision, right? And they do that old promo, which is a real promo. I found it online, and it's really fascinating. That's where you're going to set the film. It's the perfect symbolic place to discuss assimilation or going to Israel, right? Because he gets there and sees that his cousin has changed everything about himself, right? He's abandoned Judaism for Catholicism in order to assimilate. He changed his name, pretends he's lying, right? He pretends to have kids. He's married a Gentile, a shiksa. And so assimilation has cost his cousin Attila his identity and ultimately his family, right? Through his xenophobic wife who doesn't want László around anymore. And she confronts him about what's going to happen when your wife gets here. And it just starts to feel like she's being afraid of this guy being around and, populating her space. And so what does she do? She tells a lie to get rid of him. And his cousin is so far gone, he believes her. And it's just really simple, pointed, beautiful writing that has a lot to say with, very economical terms. And then the next fascinating moment to me was the Van Buren at that little party telling his story about his grandparents, right? And he just talks about how he wrote this $25,000 check unsigned and then asks his grandparents what they're going to do with it. And he decides that he doesn't like their answer. And instead, he gives them $500 to stay away from his mother. And I think there's probably a lot of symbolism that you can take away from that. I don't know what the right answer is. I don't feel like I have enough information, but maybe it's a reflection of like Israel's immigration incentives, and instead of taking that, they're here in America and getting so much less. They're so much less valued here in America. Or, maybe it's a commentary about how Americans devalue and disrespect our own family and our own heritage, right? We place our grandparents and parents into retirement homes, and we have this general familial detachment. Just a lack of close family community that permeates our culture. And maybe it's, if you're Jewish watching, that story, you're like, how could you ever treat family that way? I don't know. I have zero knowledge about what it's like to be Jewish in any country, let alone even in America. But that's a really interesting story. And I think you can take it in a lot of interesting ways. And then immediately after, Van Buren asks László, like, let me ask you, why architecture? And his first reaction to that is like, is this a test? He's like, no test. Like, just, I'm curious. And he talks about how even after this war, this like almost civilization ending war, his projects still stand. And he's like, and after the stain of this moment has passed, they'll continue to stand as like a political stimulus. And even into the future, they'll stand the erosion of the Danube, which is a really interesting thing to throw out there, because the Danube, right, is the second largest river in Europe after Russia's Volga, whatever that is. But it runs through 10 countries from Germany all the way through Romania. And even as far back, it goes back to 1st century Rome, which marked the northern border of Rome, which I think is an interesting element in context of a conversation about Christianity and Judaism, that he's hearkening back potentially to something so far as the founding of time, the way we mark time. And that's a very specific moment of the foundation of Christianity, And so I think that's pointed. I don't think it's an accident to make a throwaway comment like that. I think it's very specific. And so then we get into Van Buren commissioning Tóth to build that community center in honor of his mother. And more I think about it, his mother may represent like the founding of our country, the roots of it, right? And that's why he kicked his grandparents to the curb. That's a representation of England and how we departed them. And so if you look at the heritage of America itself, that's where his mom, and his grandparents all also tie into the story as symbols and symbolism. And so he's building this community center. That's a representation also of what America is supposed to represent, right? The founding fathers giving us the Declaration of Independence and our whole good God, what's the document? Our big freaking
the Constitution.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I keep thinking independence. I couldn't get myself to think
That's
of
all right.
Constitution.
Yeah.
So that the community center to me is, kind of representing the foundation of, the Constitution and how it's going to be reflected in its people. And so Tóth, it's interesting as a Jewish person, assimilating into America. He's not wanting to be handed the project. He's like, no, I'll draw it, and if you like it, you'll let me do it. And he's like, oh, so you want to win the project on merit? Okay, we're not going to hand you this. Fine, very well, fine. Industry, old boy, huzzah. And so he goes and designs something for the community, only to discover Van Buren's idea of community is actually really narrow. When he says community, what he's actually thinking is it's limited to his own desires, and the things that actually represent him, right? Well, how about a swimming pool? And what's his comment? I don't swim.
Yeah, I love it. And his reaction to Toth's reaction to it was perfect. He just was kind of like, you could tell he was thinking what you were thinking, which is, it doesn't matter that you don't swim. Like, what are you talking about? It's perfect. But he didn't say a word.
Nope. He nods and goes on. And all of that, all of his silence through moments where you wish you would speak up, also speaks to the immigration experience. Maybe even more so for a Jewish person coming over in that era. Like, you say the wrong thing to the wrong person, that's it. You're being, sent back to wherever you're from. That could also be worse. Think of people who seek asylum in America and how they could be taken advantage of, because if you're here on asylum, that's because you feel your life is being threatened back home. And the last thing you want to do is land in legal trouble. Imagined or not, it can still get you sent home. And so he takes a lot of stuff on the chin, right? I mean, that's what he tells his cousin. He's like, it's fine. We're done. And he leaves, even though they did nothing wrong. They were commissioned to build that library, in his home. And so you see all those moments. To me, it's hard to not see that, to not see why he's being silent. It's not part of his personality per se. It's certainly, especially the further into the film you get and see, okay, now that he's got some standing, he's more than willing to speak his mind. Because he feels a little bit safer. He feels like he can say what he's actually thinking and feeling. And that's just a really fascinating thing. But then the community center, to get back to that, it's also exclusive to his own religious preferences, right? Because, Christianity, but I thought this was for all people. And it's like, well, they're also making a big donation, which also speaks to a lot of America of, people who buy their way into spaces that should be held for everyone. Suddenly it's like, okay, I mean, it is for everyone. It's just going to have a cross on it. Like, you can be, Jewish and still walk in, we're not forbidding you, but it's certainly not as welcoming. Right. And so those kind of elements are really interesting, to represent. But what's fascinating is to see how László responds to all of that, because he still builds something that he wants. And it's beautiful. It's majestic, right? It's speaking to this new style that isn't about what came before. And that's what's interesting, too, about this film using brutalism. Because from what I understand, which is, again, very little about architecture, brutalism is all about, not looking to the past for inspiration and not putting it into this pedestal of worship or adoration, right? Like, we're not going to get into Greco-Roman whatever classic, design. Instead, we're going to move forward and think about design in a new way, that speaks to the material. The material will shine through, and we can look to the heavens and have our own thoughts, and that's a beautiful moment when he's talking about that. He's like, and people will, at the end, I think it's his daughter, right? Or the granddaughter, or grandniece, whoever you're saying is doing, or the confusion about who's giving that speech at the very end. She's making that comment, though, about how he wanted to create space so that you could look up into the heavens and have your own thoughts. and it's speaking to the religious freedom that people want in this community of America. And that's a really interesting, fascinating, element, because he's still, even within this building designed to look and reflect Christianity, he's still trying to create space for himself and for others to look up and see their own whatever they want, and that's a really beautiful sentiment, I think. And yet, even within that, even within trying to accommodate everything that isn't as communal, they start chipping away at his vision still, making him make compromises until László cannot compromise any further without losing the identity of this space, right? The height. We're trying to capture the sky in here for everyone. And then he sacrifices his own pay in order to keep his vision intact. And it's a vision that doesn't ultimately reflect himself in the first place. He's just fighting to give these rich people what they want at his own frustration and his own cost, and to still try to carve out something for everyone else to inhabit. And it's just such an interesting view of kind of the foundational elements of our country. And even so, ultimately, Van Buren assaults, rapes László, right? And this act of domination, speaking every foul, racist thing he's been thinking secretly all along. Even as he's given, this lip service of, I try to cultivate, talent in our epoch. And I try to let people, have, their excellence. And, and he's just kind of patting himself on the back, almost breaking his arm doing it, even as we can witness all the things he actually says and acts and believes. And it's just this peak hypocrisy of who this guy is and pretends to represent, even as he's disrespecting everything about it. Until
he only keeps people around him that will benefit him.
Yes.
That can help build his epoch, quote unquote.
Yeah. And until his wife eventually discovers the truth. And I love that she tells László, it was only your body, it wasn't your spirit. And I think that's this other symbolic element that, we're talking about. And she confronts Van Buren at that dinner with that great oneer. And Van Buren disappears inside the church that was built by László. And so being confronted with, his past, he hides in his religion. And that's speaking to this element of, America as well. Like, so much of our country is unwilling to really, I guess, look at, acknowledge our dark history. And you don't have to celebrate it, obviously. But you have to acknowledge it. And I think you can still move on, but you can't just hide underneath, this surface level of self-forgiveness that it seems the church kind of represents in the film. It's an interesting conversation. I don't know, but I find it really, really fascinating because at the end, his grandniece or whoever that is leaves us with that final note that you mentioned earlier, which is, don't believe the lie. It is the destination. It's not the journey. And I think perhaps she's giving space within the context of the film. She's giving space for what he built, despite what it cost him along the way. Like when you see this, don't look at what it cost you. Like just appreciate what you still built despite all of that. But also perhaps in reference to, on a more symbolic level, Israel itself, right? In light of the Holocaust and the Jewish diaspora throughout history, that despite everything they've endured, they finally have a land that they call their own, right? Israel. Israel itself plays a very strong, role in the film, right? His niece moves there and they make this, interesting argument about going there, moving there and taking part. And even as it's costing László and his wife, their presence and how she was looking forward to raising their kids there. And they're like, we can't exist here. It's, to me, this is a bit of a siren call to, Jewish people is how I'm interpreting it. Maybe I would, again, if I could watch this with this in mind, I might find a whole other element that I'm just flat out missing. And I think if you watch this with those thoughts in your head about how this could represent, the Jewish experience in America, you'll find a lot of interesting elements that are just symbolized in the plot and dialogue here and dialogue there, and the way Van Buren treats them, etc. It's interesting. It's fascinating, even if I may have varying thoughts or opinions on some of those elements. It's still a worthy conversation at the end of the day, I think, if one is capable of, as I like to do, holding multiple thoughts in your head at the same time that don't necessarily agree with each other. You kind of need that if you're going to be a well-rounded human being walking amidst other human beings.
Yeah.
It behooves you. Cinematography wise, like you mentioned, so many oners and really long takes. It's incredible execution for sure because of how much that goes into it, just the blocking alone, but also the actors. Like, your actors have to just dial in together and nail it. And the cost of that, I think, is the runtime. That's why this is 3.5 hours. It's because you have all these oners and long takes. There's no way to trim stuff out. It's either you throw the scene out or you don't. Cutting around that becomes nearly impossible because it's either you start inserting all these weird jump cuts, which really don't fit into this film, or you start chopping off the head of a shot or the tail of a shot, which again probably still won't work. He does a masterful job of setting up a scene and then giving some kind of element that lays into the next scene, and so you can't really cut the tails or the head. It just is what it is. But the benefit of that stuff, of course, you get a much stronger sense of geography and pacing. And so the pacing just helps with the emotional tune, being in tune with these characters and what they're thinking and feeling. And sometimes how someone feels is reflected in how long they take to respond. And when you can see that in real time, you know exactly why he's being silent, or you can feel why he's being silent, or that his response isn't how he actually feels. All those things are done through pacing and not blinking. And of course, it's much more tense because you can't blink, you can't look away. You feel that much more deeply embedded in everything, which again heightens all the emotions of the scene and gives so much more realism to what's happening on screen. And like the production design, the set deck, all the props, like it's just, you feel like you're there. This feels like you're really in the 50s,
It was pretty obvious when they switched to filming on like digital or like today, like when they switched to 1980, everything is super crisp. Yeah. Everything is like, it's like really clean. The lighting is different. You see plastic things. I noticed at the beginning, like there's no plastic things anywhere, which,
wow.
I also was thinking, we've talked to Hamish several times about like set decoration and everything. It's like, to get a period piece like this right, you've really got to pay attention to what didn't exist back then. Everything is plastic now, and I actually like kind of felt that it wasn't there at the beginning. And so I was looking throughout the film, for things that might not be there. I saw nothing. Everything was just it was just really, really well done. And then that changes when you get to the end in 1980. So
such a good point, because I actually noticed that too. Well, I didn't think about it in terms of, I haven't seen any plastic. Now I'm seeing it. I just suddenly was like, oh, I bet like there's plastic in her dress or whatever. It was just like,
really? You thought plastic?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It's
okay.
crazy.
I don't know why I thought that, but
yeah.
I just did. That's crazy that you thought that too.
Really crazy. Yeah, I completely agree. Like you have such a strong sense of time in this film, and it's so good. The other cinematography wise thing that I liked was the way they break up the frame in this one scene, this one shot, which is towards the beginning when Audrey is kind of putting the screws to him. He pees in the tub and she gives him grief over that. You know what? Rightly so. Like, hey, let him know, like, we have a space for that. But then, she starts, giving him grief about where he's going to live, all that stuff. And what I love, she walks over next to him and there's this tone that starts to develop about, what their conversation is. Where's this going? Is there something romantic happening here? And the lead into that is also getting them to dance together. Like there's that element too of trying to get them to touch. And we don't know what the dynamic is between Audrey and Attila, his cousin. And so we're a little unsure of what's going on here, but within that frame, there's this smoke rising in the foreground. And it's so nice because the lighting is kind of flat, and to break that up, they give us a little foreground element of the smoke, which gives us these white pockets, right? These highlights that are just kind of drifting through the frame. And what's also really nice about that, visually on just a pure cinematography level, it's nice to break up some of that pattern with some highlights, but also it gives us an interesting kind of steamy and seedy vibe to the conversation that's taking place. Feels maybe a little bit like a nightclub, and like what's happening here? Is there a subtext to the conversation? And of course, we'll soon find out that she accuses him of making a pass at her to get him out of their lives, and we instantly know, like, what? No, did that happen? No. And we start reflecting in that scene and everything we know about him. We're like, no, this isn't right. And it's just so many interesting things, but they're giving you so much information to feel a certain way and then to pull away and know that there was a moment where it could have happened, and we know for a fact it just didn't happen. And it's just so well executed. There's some masterful stuff happening in this movie. And so, yeah, it won't break my heart, I guess, if it wins Best Picture. It's not my vote. I know what my vote is, but I also would understand, because this is the kind of film that gets that kind of notoriety.
Yeah, this is Best Picture.
Yeah.
Like this is what that everybody looks for in Best Picture.
Yeah, and it was a kind of weak year overall, right? Like there's only a handful of films I was super excited about, and then a bunch of films I was like, oh, they're fine. I think there's maybe like 1 or 2 films that I just love to death, and then a bunch of films that were just solid. But this is one I'm sure Nora is probably going to get a nomination. Which it's dabbling some of the same territory. But I don't know. Anyway, what'd you think of the music? The music is like this big brutalist kind of thing. You feel the wall hitting you, and sometimes it feels like a train, like the train of progress has this kind of train engine kind of feel to it. Anything strike you about the tunes? The score?
I mean, yeah, I thought it was, it's jarring at times, unexpected. And the music is supposed to lead you to kind of like feel a certain way, right? In a film, there should be kind of dissonant sounds if you think something is off, and this does that, but it upends you a little bit. You think something is going to happen, and then nothing does, and you cut to another scene, or it just gives you like a moment of a sound, but then we're off somewhere else. It's almost feels unmotivated, but it is motivated for sure. It's like very complex. There's not really a thing that I didn't really have an anchor. Does that make sense? I didn't really have anything where, it wasn't like a motif driven kind of score, which is fine. Honestly, I was completely okay with that. Or at least if there was, I didn't get it on first watch. But it felt very thought out and methodical and pointed, very much like, the architecture itself. You kind of brought that up a little bit. It feels almost like if you were to walk into a Brutalist building, or you're looking at the building that Tóth is making, and you're thinking, where are all the windows? Like this feels so like it's kind of constrictive. I thought that the music felt like that big time. Like it's supposed to amplify a feeling. Well, it does, but that's not the feeling that I'm really seeing, right now. It amplifies something else, which kind of, for example, if they're if Harry is talking to Tóth and they're to László, and like he does on that hill that one time where he says, "We tolerate you," but the music is kind of like lighthearted. I'm not saying it was. I'm just giving an example of what I felt throughout. Then I'm feeling this confliction. I'm feeling this this is a important moment that I need to be feeling some anguish over, but I'm feeling a little bit different because the music is leading me in another direction. And I feel like that's very much what his architecture does. It allows for you to, it gives you a spectrum of feeling like, yes, this is beautiful from the outside. What's it feel like on the inside? It's got to feel constricting. And you go inside and like, yeah, it feels constricting, but at the same time, it's amazing because the ceilings are very high. And at noon, we get this cross right there on the altar, and it's beautiful at the same time as feeling like it's going to collapse in on you, and I felt like the music did an excellent kind of like really weird job at doing that, that I've never heard before. I really haven't. Whoever the composer was, whom I didn't even look him up, was really brilliant at that. And then the music at the end, in the 80s scene was very 80s. It was very synth driven and stuff, which was, and it was kind of out of context at times, but totally forgivable and beautiful, I feel like.
That's awesome.
How'd you feel about it?
Yeah, I loved it. It was definitely hitting me in the chest for the most part, and making me feel, it adds to that epic feel of a saga that takes place in America. And to me, every time I heard like certain motifs in the score, felt like a train. I just felt like we're moving forward, full steam ahead, no matter what's in front of us. And it's the train of progress is how I kept thinking about it. And it's like, we're going to progress no matter what. And it's violent sometimes, progress can be. And yeah, so, but then there's these other moments when you're listening to this beautiful score and something messed up is happening on screen. You're just like, I don't know if I'm supposed to find beauty in this, or like, just let my mind go somewhere else while this is taking place. Like, it's really interesting how the score can influence moments like that, and yeah, beautiful, regardless, in its simplicity and layers, because it felt like kind of a repetitive, at any moment, any parts of this score could kick in and it still is in rhythm. It's just a matter of what we're exploring in the moment. Pretty cool. Nice. That's all I got, man. Final thoughts?
No, it probably deserved more than what I gave it, to be honest. And I did my very best to take out the external factors and everything. I feel like I did a pretty good job at that.
I think so.
No hate at all. Out of 5, I would give it a 3.5, honestly, which is solid. It's just not something that's, feel like if I'm going to spend 3.5 hours with something, I need to walk away with at least a 4, feeling of that. And I didn't really fully get that in the second act. So yeah, that's it.
I think we're on the same page. I would say 3.5. And if they wanted to cut an hour, you could. The emotion hits different, but you could actually not lose anything plot wise for sure. But even still get probably 80% of the emotion with that. 45, 10 hour. Sorry, you were still talking.
No, not at all. And for me, like in a film like this, I want to see the building more. I would like the process of it building more. I mean, we do see the building a lot, I'm not saying that we don't, but the process of the building, instead of just like a time lapse of it being put together, which we get, and then, we cut back to it every now and then, whatever. It's just this thing that is existing throughout most of the movie, or that is like coming together, instead of it being his driving, if the destination is the thing, right? I want to be on that journey with him to get to that destination. And we are, and we're going through everything he goes through. And I get that. And maybe that's the point. But I want to be part of the building. I want to like, I don't know, be as invested in that building as he is invested in that building, right? But it's not really about the building.
Sure.
I know.
Yeah.
It's about him building his own life here, and here fighting him against building that life. So I get it. So anyway, just still a epic film, and amazing that it was made. One of my favorite shots is the quarry. It's so beautiful, like the marble quarry
in Italy.
In Italy, so beautiful.
God.
Anyway,
Nice.
I don't have anything else. Yeah.
What are you going to recommend this week?
I'm gonna kind of go off the rails a little bit, and a little bit more lighthearted. Not lighthearted, I guess, but just like satiating. I would say satiable. I'm gonna recommend Limitless.
Oh, nice.
2011 with what's his name? Forget it.
Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper. Thank you. I'm gonna recommend Limitless. I remember really liking that movie, and it was a lot of fun. And in fact, now that I'm recommending it, I want to go watch it again. So.
Yeah, I love that movie. Neil Berger, man, he does that infinity zoom a few times throughout the film.
Yes.
And it's so cool. Yes. Yeah. Well, speaking of films Robert De Niro is in, I'm going to recommend A Bronx Tale.
Nice.
Starring and directed by Robert De Niro. It's also another element to the immigrant experience in New York, and what it's like building a life as a part of a melting pot community. And the other cool thing is Brady Corbet is an actor, and so and he's gotten into directing, and he's obviously crushing it. And so I thought it would be cool to recommend another film directed by an actor. A Bronx Tale, if you haven't seen it, great film, so good. Colageno, who also has his own horrifying story in real life that's worth reading about. My God. Stay tuned for next week. We're going to go back to, I think, 95 and take a look at Michael Mann's Heat. Finally. I think I've thrown this out as an option maybe a dozen times. So I'm really excited. It's also a hefty one. It's got to be close to 3 hours now that I'm thinking about it.
What are we doing to ourselves?
Yeah, I didn't think this one through. My bad.
No, it's okay. It's okay. As long as I don't have to drive 30 miles to get to it, I'm okay.
So stay tuned for next week when we cover Heat. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget, drop us a review, subscribe, leave us a note if there's something you want us to cover or talk about. And if you want to comment on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/The Brutalist.
And our quote of the day is from Judy Garland. When you get to know a lot of people, you make a great discovery. You find that no one group has a monopoly on looks, brains, goodness, or anything else. It takes all the people, black and white, Catholic, Jewish, and Protestant, recent immigrants and Mayflower descendants, to make up America. Well said. Can't say it any better than that.
Cannot.
That's it. End of podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Please, like Wes said, subscribe, review us wherever you get your podcast, share us with your friends. All of it helps a lot. And if there's a film you'd like to see us talk about, maybe pick apart a little bit, just say what we think about it, share it with us. Who knows, maybe one day we'll do it. Until next time, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies. I got nothing for this.